Most Americans have no idea where they really stand in the wealth ladder. You might think you're middle class, but the numbers tell a completely different story. In this video, we're breaking down exactly what net worth looks like across the US, from households struggling at the bottom to those sitting in the top 10%. By the end, you'll see where your household really fits, and some of the numbers might surprise you. First, a quick note. These numbers refer to household net worth, not income and not individual wealth. Net worth is calculated by taking everything you own, your home, retirement accounts, investments, savings, vehicles, and other assets, and subtracting everything you owe, like mortgages, credit cards, student loans, and other debt. What's left is your net worth. The data is from the Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances, and the numbers have been adjusted to 2026 dollars. Now let's start at the bottom and work our way up. The lower class or bottom 25% of households have a net worth of less than about $23,000. At this level, you can see that households have very limited assets. Some may have a small savings account or an older vehicle, but debts often offset much of what they own. In many cases, net worth is close to zero or even negative. This group is typically living paycheck to paycheck. Unexpected expenses can be financially disruptive, and long-term investment accounts are often minimal or non-existent. This doesn't necessarily mean low income, though income and wealth often correlate. Sometimes people in this group are just very early in their careers, paying down student loans or recovering from financial setbacks. But from a net worth perspective, this group sits firmly in what we'd call the lower class in the wealth distribution. Now let's move up to the next segment. If your household is in the lower middle class, between the 25th and 50th percentile, your net worth is probably somewhere between $23,000 and $179,000. At this stage, many people have started building real assets, but most of that wealth is tied up in their home. It's not usually the result of aggressive saving or investing. Rather, it comes from simply owning a house. A modest amount may also be in a 401k, retirement account, or savings, but it's often just a fraction at this point. The key thing to understand is that while this group has made progress, the financial cushion is still very limited. Much of their wealth isn't easily accessible. If a surprise expense pops up, like a car repair or even a temporary job loss, they might have to dip into their small liquid savings, take on new debt, or adjust their budget. In other words, being in the lower middle class means you're building towards stability, but there's still a level of financial fragility. You have some assets, but not enough flexibility to absorb big shocks without careful planning. From here, households usually head in one of two directions. Many will stay in the lower middle class, making slow progress over time. A fraction of this group who begin saving, investing, or increasing their income strategically can accelerate upward and eventually reach higher wealth brackets. The key is that where you start isn't permanent. Intentional steps can shift your trajectory over the years. Now keep in mind, some households in these brackets may appear lower on the ladder simply because they're younger, early in their careers, still paying off student loans, or just starting to build assets. Now we reach the median, the 50th percentile. This is the point where half of American households have more wealth and half have less. According to the data, the median net worth sits at about $179,000. That number often surprises people. When most of us see headlines about rising home values or booming stock markets, we assume the average American must be doing great. So what does a median net worth of $179,000 actually look like in real life? For most at this level, much of that $179,000 isn't sitting in a checking account. A large share is tied up in home equity with some money in retirement accounts. A typical median household might look something like this. Homeownership with some equity. This often makes up the majority of net worth. Retirement savings, like a 401k or IRA, growing but not very quickly. Contributions are minimal. Modest liquid savings, a bit of cash set aside, but usually not enough to handle a major emergency without adjustment. Some consumer debt, like car loans or credit cards, but generally manageable. The middle is doing all right, but they're not really thriving. They have steady income and access to credit, but they're mostly just treading water. However, households that prioritize investing, reducing debt, or increasing income can completely change their trajectory. Over time, small but consistent actions here can compound into substantial wealth growth. This is what we'd call the upper middle class, with net worth roughly $179,000 to $610,000. Most households own homes with significant equity, but retirement accounts are often well established. Probably at least half is tied up in home equity, but compared with lower brackets, this is starting to balance out. If a household has a net worth of around $500,000, it's likely split about half in home equity and half in savings, investments, and other assets. things begin gradually shifting towards assets that can grow and be more flexible, rather than just relying on a home as their largest source of wealth. Debt is still present, mortgages, car loans, or other obligations, but it's manageable relative to income and often more intentional, like borrowing at low rates instead of just focusing on the monthly payment, which allows this group to save and invest consistently. They prioritize investment growth over home equity and often have multiple streams of income. This is a major transition phase, and households that build steady, diversified growth here often move into the top 25%, demonstrating how intentional choices can accelerate upward trajectory over time. Now we enter a bracket many people think of as truly successful. Here, the way money is spread out starts to look very different. Households between the 75th and 90th percentile have a net worth between roughly $610,000 and $1.72 million, placing them in the upper class. At this level, the financial picture really begins to change. People in this group typically have multiple asset types: home equity, retirement accounts, taxable investments, and sometimes business ownership or extra real estate. The biggest difference? Investments now make up the majority of net worth, probably around 75%, with home equity accounting for the rest. This indicates a shift from wealth built primarily through property to wealth built through diversified assets. Because they've established smart financial habits and prioritized growth, moving up to the next wealth tier becomes much easier. Assets compound, investments grow, and the momentum starts to carry itself. And the story doesn't stop here. The top 10% and beyond show just how much wealth can accelerate when these habits are consistently applied. Now at the very top, we reach the top 10% of households. To get here, a household needs a net worth of roughly $1.72 million or more. This is the point where people start moving into what we'd call the wealthy class. Wealth at this level works differently. Investments make up the bulk of net worth, with just a fraction in home equity. Stock portfolios, real estate holdings, and other assets can generate dividends, interest, rental income, and business profits. This means the money is actively working for the household, rather than just sitting around. Some households here have reached full financial independence where their investments alone can support their lifestyle. Others are still working, but their substantial financial base gives them freedom and flexibility that most people can only dream of. The ability to take risks, invest opportunistically, or plan for multiple generations. Even within the top 10%, there's a pretty big range. Households near the lower threshold might still be focused on growth, while those closer to the top 1%, with net worths of tens of millions of dollars, see wealth compound and accelerate in ways that are almost unstoppable. But even hitting the entry point of the top 10% already places a household among the wealthiest Americans, with resources, flexibility, and opportunities that the vast majority never experience. But keep in mind, all of these numbers don't account for age. Younger households may appear in the lower brackets simply because they're early in their careers or still paying off student loans. The important part is trajectory. People who are intentional tend to move up the ladder over time, often faster than it seems. So here's the wealth ladder in a nutshell. Under $23,000 puts you at the bottom. $23,000 to $179,000 is lower middle class. $179,000 to $610,000 is upper middle class. $610,000 to $1.72 million is upper class, and above $1.72 million puts you in the top 10%. The jumps between each step aren't small. They grow quickly, and by the top 10%, wealth multiplies many times over. Here's the key takeaway. Where you are today is just your current location. Paying down debt, building equity, and investing consistently can move you up over time. Understanding the numbers gives you perspective, and that's the first step towards climbing the ladder.